Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 4 stories, from an otherworldly encounter at a bar, to a cabin in the middle of nowhere, and much, much more. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 3 likes on this video. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this all of the time. Sharing the video, dropping a comment, of course, all of that helps as well. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I've always had a bad habit of getting myself into trouble, but I've never accidentally walked headfirst into a disaster before. A group of friends invited me to a newly opened bar. Work ran late and I was the last one still on the way. The address led me downtown to an area I'd never been to before. I'd only moved to the city a year ago, so I was still finding my way around. I took the bus relying on my GPS. At some point, the signal was lost because of the large buildings. My GPS jumped around, confused about where I was. I've always had issues like this on the rare trip to the larger populated areas. Normally I had someone with me to fill in the blanks before I got too lost. This time my phone guided me to the wrong location. I stepped off the bus and followed the jumpy directions on the screen until it told me I arrived at my destination. In front of me was a small alleyway that led to a bright red door. I heard the sounds of music mixed with voices. Assuming this was the back entrance to the bar, I walked forward, hoping I could go in that way. The door opened to worn wooden steps with flaking paint. If it weren't for the clear sounds of activity, I would have second-guessed myself. At the bottom was a dim, smoky room with a large wooden bar on one side. A handful of tables filled the rest of the space. Most were empty aside from a few people with their backs turned towards the door. I didn't see my friends and started to think I got the wrong place. Maybe I could ask for directions since I was here. My eyes adjusted as I walked closer to the bar. The person behind it appeared odd. This must either be a themed place or some sort of early Halloween event was happening. At first I assumed he had some kind of hairpiece. When he turned to face me, I stopped in my tracks, seeing his face. It appeared bright blue flowers were growing out of the left side of his face, upwards mixing with his long mossy hair. Whatever makeup he used was very impressive. The sight of the leaves coming through the skin made me internally squirm. I started getting the attention of the others. Sweat started at the base of my neck. The others were also dressed up. Some had horns or glowing eyes. I swear I noticed a pair of realistic hooves peek out from under the table. Could you... I got cut off by a smaller person suddenly slamming into my side and hooking their arm into mine. "There you are. You're late," a thin, whispery voice said. Looking down, I saw it belonged to a short person with long, gray, smoke-like hair. At first, I thought it was a girl, but the loose top gave away his gender. My eyes must have been playing tricks on me. His bare feet looked to be floating off the ground for a moment, and a long lion tail flicked behind him. "Barry, I'm taking my client to one of the comfort rooms. Can you ask Mitty to drop off some drinks?" he asked the bartender, who nodded. I found myself getting pulled aside with strength I didn't think this guy had. I was confused, to put it lightly. He guided us to a hallway lined with more doors. We quickly ducked inside into a small room with a deep red leather couch taking up most of the space. I started to panic, wondering what on earth I got myself into. The stranger sat down, letting out a massive sigh. His face was red from embarrassment. He didn't appear threatening. I sat beside him, waiting for answers. "What is going on?" I finally asked after giving him a moment. "I should be asking you that. How did you even get in here?" he pressed, leaning forward. His voice was so light that even though he was raising it, it sounded like it could be lost in a gust of wind. I walked in here. What kind of dress-up event is going on? How does your tail work? I reached out for the tail on the couch cushion for it to be pulled away from my hand. The stranger studied my face, deciding if I was lying or not. You really don't know what kind of place you walked into, he said cautiously. It's just a bar, I shrugged. My words were proved very, very wrong after a knock came to the door. It opened a second afterward. A set of drinks on a small silver serving tray, and one of the many hands of the creature that appeared. My body shrank back, the massive shape spilling through the door like liquid. It appeared to be made up of a mess of dark limbs swimming into each other. The drinks were set down on the small table, and the creature slipped away, leaving behind a strange burnt smell. I sat in shock, trying to get my heart to slow down. I was too scared to move aside from glancing to my side to see if the other person in the room was freaked out as well. When I was able, I grabbed the drink, chugging it in one go. If it was poisoned, then I wouldn't need to deal with seeing any more of those monsters. What was that? I gasped. Biddy. He's nicer than Mitty. Yeah, that didn't explain anything at all. What about you? I said when I realized we never introduced ourselves. I'm Wisp. He awkwardly held out his hand for me to shake. Joey. I said, feeling odd that a simple handshake calmed me down a little. I stood trying to pace around the room, attempting to make sense of all this. What is even going on? I mean, that was a monster. Things like that aren't real. How can they be without people knowing about it? I questioned, my fear coming back. Do you want the really long and complicated answer you might not understand, or the simple one? Wisp offered. Simple. Magic. He shrugged. I let myself sink back onto the couch, head swimming. Okay, sure, whatever. Monsters and magic were real. That didn't help me out right then. I needed to get out of there. I'm sorry this happened. Normally humans can't enter this place. I'm not sure if it was by accident. You were able to get in here, or if it was on purpose to lure in an unaware meal by the bar owner. He looked distraught over the mix-up. I had the feeling no one would expect Wisp to step up and help an unsuspecting human, giving the lie that he had been waiting for me some credit. He saved my life by some very quick thinking. Can I just wait a few minutes and just leave? I questioned. Wisp shook his head, his hair moving slowly as if underwater. Maybe. There is a chance you'll be able to walk out of here after it seems like you're done with my services. The issue is, I owe a few people outside favors. If one of them asks me to hand you over for a meal, I'll need to listen to them, or give myself instead. I would like to think of a way for both of us to get out of here, he explained with another shake of his head. I studied him closer than before. He had slim, delicate features and clothing made of a light, almost sheer fabric. I found my mind wandering over what kind of services he offered. He did call this a comfort room after all. What services? I mean, surely they'll be listening for certain noises. I commented, feeling my face starting to turn a shade of pink. An amused smirk appeared on Wisp's face, followed by my train of thought. I'm good at massages. What do you think I offered? He teased. My face turned a deeper shade of red as I refused to answer. Can I just sneak out the back door? I suggested. His face lit up with an enthusiastic nod. He grabbed my wrist, ready to lead. We'll try that. He opened the door and poked his head out, seeing that the coast was clear. Slowly we walked down the long hallway of red doors, the Stress building. I stopped when I heard a scream cut short behind one of those doors. A faint crunch came that made my skin crawl. Glancing at Wisp, his expression confirmed what I suspected. These rooms were used for monsters to eat in private, as well as to do other things. I tightened my grip on his small hand, relieved he had been the one to approach me at the bar. We finally found the end of the hallway. It ended in two paths. One appeared to go further inside with another line of doors, and the other led to a double set of doors. Through the circular window, I saw it was a kitchen. There was also a set of doors I assumed to be for some washrooms. We needed to get through the kitchen without anyone noticing us, and we were in the clear. Somehow something had been following us without making a single sound. I suddenly felt eyes at my back. Glancing over my shoulder, I was met with a horrifying sight. The monster behind had been the same one that served the drinks. The body filled the entire hallway behind us. The shapeless man silently moved the countless limbs and black liquid connecting them. A hand from the mass reached out and pointed in the direction of the washrooms. Wisp gave me a stressed expression, showing I should go inside the room. Dragging Wisp behind me, we stumbled inside, locking the door behind us. The room was small with only a single sink and two stalls. I waited for my heart to slow down enough to think clearly. "Should we?" I started. Voices outside made me shut up really fast. My hands flew to the door to keep it locked. "Do you know what room they're in?" the deeper voice asked. "Why are you asking? Unlike me, Wisp doesn't owe you a meal," the softer voice pointed out. "It's a human that walked in here with his own free will. He exposed himself to us. I can eat him if I want to without breaking any rules. Come on, I'll share." I held my breath, my brain almost shutting down from fear. God, why did I make such a mistake? How the hell am I going to get out of here with almost everyone in the building after my flesh? "Only if we ask Smile to cook the human for us. I'm a bit tired of raw food." The deep voice scoffed at the suggestion. For another minute or so, they had a discussion of what was the best way to eat humans. These two sounded human, and yet they weren't. I never expected monsters to come in so many different types. Biddy was a nightmare, and yet Wisp was gentle and kind. "Hey Biddy, which way did they go?" the deep voice questioned. My heart stopped and I felt Wisp place a hand on my shoulder. After a second, the voice thanked the silent creature. I heard the footsteps get closer. Then, thankfully, they started down the other hallway. A knock came to the door. Wisp put a hand on mine, showing it was okay to come out. Biddy greeted us. The black shape pressed against the ceiling. Wisp nodded at it, then guided me back down where we came from. Biddy dripped down, expanding to fill the hallway behind us, shielding us from anyone who may see us from the other end of the hallway. We darted inside a room and collapsed on the couch, exhausted from the short trip. "Well, the entire kitchen wants to cook you, so no sneaking out the back for us," Wisp said, sounding disappointed. An idea came to me. "Biddy seems nice. Do you think him will help me get out of here?" I suggested. Wisp rested his chin on his palm, thinking it over. "Supernatural creatures don't use money. Our world runs based on a favor system. I won't go into how complicated it can get, but Biddy is bound by our rules to take something from a person if they ask something from him. From what I've seen, he acts nice and does a few small free things to lure a person into asking for a bigger favor. In exchange, he'll take a part of their body and add it to his own." So Biddy was out of the question. His guiding the other pair away wasn't out of the goodness of his heart. He wanted something out of me like everyone else, aside from Wisp. "What about you? What do you get out of this?" I asked, hating how it sounded like I was accusing him of some sort of an ulterior motive. He sat back on the couch, not offended by the question. Some creatures don't include humans to the favor system simply because they're not part of our culture. It's unfair to hold you to our standards. However, some creatures won't eat if they don't. And aside from that, I can understand a little what it's like to be human. I'm not a strong creature. My services aren't worth much. I struggle as much as you would dealing with supernatural creatures. I didn't even consider something like that. This favor system didn't seem overly fair. Because of what Wisp was, it took more of him to repay favors and debts. I crossed my arms feeling stuck. There didn't appear to be a way out of all of this until it literally barged in. "Wisp, I hear you have something interesting," a loud, excited voice said, causing us to jump. The person who walked in made Wisp cringe out of annoyance and disgust. It was easy to tell he didn't think much of the newcomer. At first, I thought it was a guy. After seeing the high black heels, I changed my mind. Gender was a hard thing to pin down with supernatural creatures. Her hair was red and shoulder length. It was a wild, wavy mess that covered half her face. A scar at the side of her mouth made it appear she was always smiling. "Jake, how did you even find out? I swear you snoop around looking to cause trouble," Wisp commented, not pleased at all. "Yeah, I do," she said proudly. "Anyway, let me have a bite." In a flash, he was in front of me trying to defend a poor human from a much stronger creature. She waved a clawed hand, amused over his display. "You owe me a lot, you know," she mocked with a cruel expression. "You're a half-breed. Why should I repay anything when you don't belong to our world?" he said bitterly. Her cheerful demeanor dropped and a dark expression came over her face. I felt chills run through my body. This person was strong. Deep down, I knew that. It was like a primal fear awakened, telling me to run. "Oh, you're cute. Saying something like that while your legs shake," she pointed out. He looked away, ashamed of the small tremble in his knees. We needed to defuse the situation. I put a hand on his shoulder to signal I would be okay hearing this person out. "What do you want in exchange for helping me leave?" I asked, preparing myself for a horrible answer. She moved her head back and forth, considering the offer. With some protest from Wisp, she reached out to take hold of my shoulders. For the next minute, her hands patted me down, feeling my arm muscles and studying my face. She emptied out my pockets, looked through my wallet, and then glanced at my phone. When my items were returned, a smile came back to her face. "I have a plan to get you out of the bar. I know what I want, but I won't tell you until after you're outside," she offered. "Can I at least ask for a hint for what you want?" I asked. "Nope." She crossed her arms and looked away. Agreeing with her was basically offering a blank check. It wasn't as if I had too many options. I had the feeling this person wanted more to be amused than a meal. "Erase Wisp's debt to you, and we have a deal," I counter-offered. She shook my hand before Wisp got a word out condemning the exchange. His eyes grew wet, and I assured him that things would work out. I didn't fully believe that. He didn't either, but he nodded, wanting to try and stay strong for a new friend. "Okay, here's what we're going to do." Jake started to tell us a plan. I was shocked by just how simple it was. I held Wisp's hand for courage, but mostly to make him feel better. Soon we left the room to walk out into the bar area. Fear ruined my stomach, and it was hard to keep myself steady. The place had gotten busier with all sorts of creatures sitting at the tables. Their countless, differently colored, glowing eyes watch our every movement. "What do you have there, Wisp?" one asked in a garbling voice that sounded like a flowing river. "How about giving us a bite?" another suggested. "Is that a snack or a partner? Can't you do better?" That last jab stung a little. Wisp kept his head up high, refusing to acknowledge any of them. Jake had hung back to make a grand entrance into the room. She kicked open the door, placed hands on her hips, and stomped her heeled foot so hard the sound made the room silent. "There you are. You owe me a meal. Hand over the tasty little human," she demanded. Wisp stopped, and with a deep breath to steady himself, he started to follow the plan. "I don't owe you a full meal. I'll make you a bet. If you can catch me in the next 60 seconds, I'll hand over the human. If you can't, what I owe you will be null and void." Jake laughed in a way that made her sound full of herself. She agreed to the bet. Wisp nodded over to the bartender, who found an ornate hourglass, placing it on the wooden surface. He waited until everyone was ready, then flipped it, starting the timer. Jake's body was a blur I nearly couldn't follow. Her fingertips were almost touching Wisp when he disappeared in a puff of smoke. He reformed on the other side of the bar, floating in the air waiting for her next attempt. The next minute was chaos. Jake tore through the room, crashing into people and jumping off tables or walls, aiming for Wisp. He avoided her each time. I knew this was an act, but Jake appeared actually angry. Her cheeks grew as red as her hair when the cursing started. She got down on all fours, bouncing around the room like a cat, being just a millisecond too late catching her target. When the time was up, Wisp appeared next to my side, his arms wrapped around mine. The bar was a mess, and yet the creatures inside were howling with laughter, jeering at Jake, who should have been able to catch a weaker creature. She stayed on all fours, literally fuming. Smoke poured from her mouth as a red glow appeared at the base of her throat. I really thought she might start spitting fire. "I don't know what you did to get stronger, but that was BS," she shouted, voice tainted with rage. "What's the matter, half-bred? Can't catch a little bit of smoke?" One of the creatures mocked. "Shove it. Screw all of you. I already got a little nip of that human, and he's not even worth it," she screamed, putting on the best sour grapes display she could. The creatures glanced in my direction, at the small bite mark on my wrist she made before we left the other room. Jake was a strong creature, but due to her half-breed status, she didn't get a lot of respect. There weren't too many creatures in the room that wanted to eat something she had her mouth on, and the ones that did now no longer thought they could snag me away from Wisp. She flipped everyone off and stormed out of the bar. Once she was gone, the creatures started to clean up the mess and righting tables. We walked towards the door only to be stopped by some monsters patting Wisp on the back. I felt disgusted they were only treating him nicely because he outran a stronger creature. "Come by with your new partner sometime. We'll get you a drink. We had fun watching the show," a creature with a set of horns commented. I felt my face get red, but we didn't correct him. We raced up the stairs the moment no eyes were on us. The cool night air greeted us in the small alleyway. I've never been so glad to hear the sounds of a busy city before. "You were perfect," I said to my new friend and scooped him up in a tight hug. The excitement of being alive got to me. I didn't even realize what I was doing until I saw his embarrassed face. I apologized and quickly set him down. We now only had one last thing to deal with. Jake appeared, a smug grin all over her face. "Okay, loser, pay up," she demanded. I sighed, wondering what she was going to chew off. Was I really going to still die tonight? "He's a human that made a mistake. Don't..." Wisp started. He got in front of me, but Jake easily brushed him off. Her hand shot in my pocket, fumbling around. Wisp let out a gasp at how inappropriate the action looked. I jumped back, feeling violated, letting her take my phone. She fiddled with my phone and then took off the case. She tossed it aside, not interested in it. She then pulled out the same model from her pocket, placing the case over it gleefully, showing it off. "I love Kamen Rider, but I can't find any merch of it," she explained. I got the case from a nerdy mystery blind box. I had no idea who the character was, but thought it looked cool enough and kept it. Who knew that would save my life someday? That's it? Wisp asks, stunned. Do you want me to take something else? She grinned. We both shook our heads, praying she wasn't going to change her mind. I put my number in your phone. Normally, when a person comes across supernatural creatures, they encounter them again. You can ask for help, but I won't let you off easy again. Also, Wisp doesn't have a phone. I can arrange some meetings between you two. We sputtered at her suggestion. He had done whatever he could to save my life. That was all. Sure, I wanted to see him again, but that didn't mean anything. No, arranging a meeting would be a favor. You were just trying to weasel more stuff from him, Wisp pointed out. I'll just move into his place. The world stopped for a second. I didn't think I heard him right. Move in? Why move in? I dumbly looked at him for answers. Have you ever heard of those creatures that clean your place in exchange for cream on the mantelpiece? My species is similar. We keep unwanted pests out as long as you keep a candle with 3 wicks lit. You won't even notice I'm there, he cheerfully explained as if this was all normal. I found myself nodding my head to say I understood what he was saying, unaware that made it appear I was agreeing to him moving in. I mean, would living with a supernatural creature be so bad? Jake smirked, thinking of something unpleasant, making me want to punch her in the face. Are you sure you would be okay living with me? My place is sort of small, I commented, warming up to the idea. I don't take up a lot of space, and you can kick me out whenever you don't need my services. I frowned, not liking the suggestion. Did Wisp only hang out at this bar because he didn't have anywhere else to go? I didn't want him coming back here with people who didn't respect him. Do you think a taxi will pick us up? I wondered, looking him over. Any driver would have questions about his appearance. He shook his head and then reached up to pluck out one of my hairs. I know where you live. See you when you get home. His body disappeared in another puff of smoke, leaving me behind with Jake. She was grinning away, ready to tease me over the deal. I ignored her. My friend had been texting me wondering where I was. I decided to lie and say something came up, and headed home for the night. I hope I don't need to use Jake's number again. Right now, I really do not want to come across any other supernatural creatures again besides my good-mannered and polite new roommate. Hopefully this is the right place for this, because I have no idea what else to do. The police are useless. No one I've talked to takes me seriously. I know this story sounds impossible, but something happened to my brother and my friend, and I need to figure out what it was and how to get them back. I am so scared something horrible has happened to them. The cops found this typed up on Steph's phone and asked me if I could explain it. I can't. It looks like she was trying to post it here but couldn't get enough of a signal for it to go through. I'm posting it now to see if anyone can actually help, because I can't make any sense of it. I haven't changed a thing. I even left the typos in case I missed something important. Steph didn't mention the name of the town, and I won't either, because I don't think anyone should go looking for it. I certainly won't be going back anytime soon. Not unless I have to. Please, just read this, and help if you can. I'm sorry for any typos or if I leave stuff out. I'm trying to make this make sense, but I don't have long and it's getting hard to type. I hope somebody can tell me what's going on and how to stop it. I'm so scared and I don't know what to do. I'm in this cabin in the mountains in Pennsylvania. I don't even know what this place is called. I just followed my friend's directions. Please just help me. I'm supposed to be dog sitting for my friend's brother, but stuff started going wrong pretty much immediately. My friend, Amy, we're 26 now, but we've known each other since 6th grade. She knew I was strapped for cash and she let me know her brother needed a dog sitter for this weekend. I'm not really a dog person. There was an incident when I was a kid. I still have the scar to prove it. It took me forever to mostly move past it, but I need the money. And I won't lie, I've always kind of had a crush on her brother. So I jumped at the chance to get his number, and maybe an in with him. What she failed to tell me is that her brother, Jason, lived in a creepy cabin in the middle of the creepy woods in the creepy mountains. I knew it was rural. She'd said as much before. But I figured he was at least near a town of some kind. Nope. Miles from anything that could remotely be called a town. I probably should have guessed when Amy sent me typed up directions instead of just giving me an address to plug into Google Maps. But I was too relieved about the job and didn't ask questions. I'd been trundling along a dirt road for over an hour, maybe two, wincing every time I hit an unavoidable pothole in my crappy old car before it happened. It was dark. I couldn't see more than 10 feet in front of me, even with my high beams on. No streetlights, and the trees blocked every last scrap of moonlight. Anyway, I was creeping along, trying not to do any permanent damage to my car. I was munching on some of the French fries I'd picked up before I got off the highway, and thank God, since I doubted any pizza place would deliver out here, and I was too wiped to cook for myself. I had rolled a window down since my AC was on the fritz, and the weather was weirdly hot for this time of year. I always thought of the woods as quiet, but the noise was ungodly. The crickets were absolutely shrieking, to the point where I couldn't hear half of what was being said on the podcast I was listening to. It was honestly starting to creep me out, but I couldn't put the window up or I'd boil to death in the car. Then I heard what sounded like a scream. A human scream, and hit the brakes. I realized pretty quickly it couldn't be a person, not this far out in the wilderness, and on what must be Jason's private property. I knew some animals could make a sound like that. A fox, a mountain lion, whatever it was, I didn't want to be anywhere near it. I hit the gas again. Something streaked across the road in front of me and I slammed on the brakes and swerved, almost careening off the road in the process. I threw the car into park, my heart pounding, hacking up the French fry I'd been chewing. When I'd finally coughed it up and caught my breath, I heard the barking. I looked out and there was a dog on the side of the road, barking and growling, hackles raised. It had a collar on, so it was clearly someone's pet, not anything wild. I was too scared to get out of the car in case the dog decided to lunge at me, so I rolled the window up until it was only open a crack and whistled. It took a few tries, but eventually the dog turned to look at me. Almost instantly its demeanor changed. Ears went back, tail tucked between its legs. It crawled over to my car, jumping up and scratching at the window to be let in. That's when I saw the tag. It had the dog's name, Barney, printed on it, along with the owner's phone number. This was Jason's dog. I looked into the trees, wondering what he'd been barking at. Probably whatever I'd heard screaming. I needed to get out of here, with Barney. I unbuckled myself, reached back, and threw open the back door. Barney leapt in, panting and shaking, and I slammed the door shut. The dog whipped around to look at me, and I swear for half a second he looked ready to attack, but he sniffed my hand and calmed down again, laying down on the back seat. I turned and took off again, hands shaking. I turned a corner and saw Jason's house. On top, I saw the silhouette of what appeared to be a large fallen tree limb with gnarled branches sticking out in every direction. But the house was in a large clearing, no trees nearby. It wasn't until I pulled up closer to the house that I realized what it was. A mass of antennas and satellite dishes covering basically the whole top of the house, with cables stretched and twisted between them to form one haphazard mass. making the whole thing look like the floor of an untamed jungle. What could that be for? Was that how Jason had an internet connection out here? Or was he losing his mind from the isolation and building his own techie version of the Sarah Winchester house at the instructions of the ghost in his head? Can't say I'd blame him if he was, being out here by himself. All the lights were on and I could see his car parked around the side of the cabin. And right in front of me, I saw the front door open wide. Immediately a million different horrifying scenarios run through my mind. Did Jason have some kind of terrible accident, a heart attack, and run from the house for help? Did someone break in? Could that have been him screaming in the trees? I checked my phone. No bars out here. I knew Jason must have Wi-Fi because he worked remotely from up here, but it must not extend outside. I glanced at my mirror. Barney was quiet and still now, but his eyes were wide open, watching me intently. Sighing, I got out of the car, walked up to the porch. I glanced through the open door, standing way back. Everything looked okay from out here. I took one tentative step over the threshold. Still nothing out of place. No signs of a struggle. The furniture was all upright and where it should be. Jason's big screen TV and expensive-looking speakers were still there, and his car keys sat on the dining room table, so I doubted it was burglars. I was still freaked, though. Next to the fireplace, a glass front cabinet contained a number of rifles. I thought having one might make me feel safer, but I had no idea how to use one, or even where Jason kept the ammunition, so they were useless to me. Then my eyes moved to the fireplace, where 2 axes were mounted over the mantel. Perfect. I took one down. It was heavier than I expected, but it would have to do. I went from room to room quietly as I could, but everything looked normal. Finally, I made my way to Jason's office. My heart was practically beating through my chest now. I turned the knob and pushed it open half an inch. I used both hands to hold the axe over my head ready to strike, then kicked the door open and jumped back. The room was pitch black. Perfectly dark. Somehow the light from the hallway didn't seem to seep in there at all. Someone could be hiding out in there, and I'd have no way of knowing. I tried to think what to do. "Hey," I said, "the cops are on their way, so you better not do anything stupid. Just stay back, or you're in deep..." My voice sounded high-pitched and shaky, not intimidating like I'd hoped. I inched forward and, against my better judgment, reached inside the door frame to search for a light switch, holding the axe awkwardly in my other hand. Any second I expected something to reach out and grab me and yank me into the yawning black. But it didn't. I found the light, switched it on. The light, first of all, was weird, dense and orange-brown, so that I could barely see even with it on. Inside the room there was no one, but this place was weird. I'd expected a desk, a chair, a computer, normal office stuff. There were a bunch of computer monitors, maybe a dozen, more, on a series of folding tables that wrapped around the room. Under the tables, a bunch of processors were stacked horizontally on top of one another, basically as many as could physically fit down there, and everything was connected with a tangle of cords and wires, some of which ran up the wall and into the ceiling. One long cord stretched out of this mess and connected to a cube sitting in the center of the room on the floor. Nothing appeared to be on, but I could hear a dull buzzing, so maybe it was all just asleep. Setting down the axe outside the door, I took a few steps inside. I assumed the cube thing controlled it all, so I kneeled down to look at it. There were no buttons or anything obvious to press. Maybe it worked like a trackpad. I reached out for it, and a pins and needles sensation started in my fingertips. I guess I should have stopped then, but, well, I didn't. I touched it with the tips of my fingers. Everything awoke at once. A screeching sound shot out from behind the far wall of processors, nearly deafening me before I could clap my hands over my ears. The monitors, somehow they turned blacker, a darker dark that made my eyes ache, before rows and rows of green text scrolled rapidly down each of the screens. As far as I could tell, it looked like just random symbols, not any language I recognized. I crept closer to get a better look, and then all of it stopped. Silence crashed down over me, and the screens went blank. Cringing, I gave the cube a few tentative pokes, but nothing happened this time. Even the buzzing had quieted. My fingers still felt like they were vibrating, though. What the? I rose to my feet with difficulty. As my legs were wobbling beneath me, I shook my hand in a futile attempt to get rid of that vibrating feeling, then pulled out my phone. My signal was strong here, so I tried to call Jason, but my calls wouldn't connect. I don't mean it went straight to voicemail. I mean it made this horrible screechy sound that I guess means the number has been disconnected. For a moment, I thought the computers had turned back on, but no, it was just my phone. I tried texting him too, but those bounced right back. So I called Amy. Hey, Steph, did you get there okay? Well, yes, but I think something's wrong. Jason's not here. What do you mean? Asked Amy. I mean, I drove up here. Barney was out running loose, and the cabin door was wide open, but no Jason inside. A long pause. Are you sure? Amy, I checked the whole place. He's gone. Nothing's out of place. I don't think he was hurt or anything, but he's not here. Did you call him? I can't get through. Okay. I'll call the friends he's supposed to meet up with. Maybe he's with them. I think maybe I should call the police. I don't... She stopped suddenly. Amy? No response. I checked my phone. The call had been cut off. No signal. Great. I walked out of the office to check on Barney, and the office door slammed shut behind me. I screamed and fell to the floor. I lay there for a long time, too scared to look behind me. Finally, I stood up and tried the door, but it was firmly locked. I leaned my full weight into it, but it wouldn't budge. I should have left. I know that. But slowly, methodically, I convinced myself that everything had a logical explanation. Jason had left the house in a hurry because there'd been an emergency. Whatever was up with the signal on my phone must have messed with his too. That's why he hadn't called or texted. His car was here, but, well, maybe he had a second one, or a motorcycle or something, or someone picked him up. The office, well, that was weird. Maybe Jason was running some kind of experiment. That would explain the stuff in the roof, too. Or maybe I was right earlier and he was kind of losing it, being all alone up here. And the door, the wind must have blown it shut, but there had been no window in there. Screw it. The AC must have switched on, blown the door shut, and jammed it somehow. I calmed a little and went to call Amy back, but I had no service. Oh well, nothing I could do about it now. Eventually, I explained away all of it. Part of me was still scared, but what was I going to do? Run away from here? Run from nothing and no one? I went out to the car to collect Barney and my things, looking around me for any kind of threat. I had to drag the dog back to the house. He kept staring and growling at the tree line. Had the mountain lion or whatever followed us back? This whole thing was really unnerving, and I started second-guessing my decision to stay. But I didn't want to wind my way back down the mountain in the pitch dark with a mad dog in tow. I'd stay here till morning, and leave then if I needed. Maybe by then, Amy would have figured out that Jason is fine. Maybe the dog would be back to normal. Maybe this gig wouldn't be a total... I shook my hand again. That pins and needles feeling just would not subside. And then I fed the dog, poured myself a large glass of the wine I'd brought, and sat down to watch some TV and finish my french fries. The cable up here was not much better than the cell service, it turned out. The signal was fuzzy and kept cutting out. Finally, I gave up and rummaged through the stacks of DVDs next to the couch. He had almost nothing I liked, almost all thrillers and horror. How he managed to watch these things up here all by himself, I do not understand. But I found some sci-fi thing that didn't seem too scary, so I popped it into the DVD player and sat down to watch it. I fell asleep almost instantly. I woke to the sound of Barney growling. I sat bolt upright and saw him standing at the door, baring his teeth, ready to attack. Oh, buddy, not again. I stood up and looked out the window. Nothing, just trees and dark. Barney had quieted down again. I realized I need to let the dog out before bed. I clipped on his collar and leash and started to walk outside, but grabbed the axe on my way out, just in case. Nothing happened to us. Barney did not so much as glance up at the trees, just did his business and went back inside. Whatever had been stalking us must have given up. I turned off the movie and went to brush my teeth, feeling much more relaxed than I had just a few minutes ago. If it weren't for the vibrating, it had spread to the fingers on my other hand now, I'd have felt completely at peace. When I came out of the bathroom, I noticed something on the floor that I hadn't seen before. It was a piece of paper torn off from the paper bag, with a few words scrawled on it in messy handwriting. Sorry, have to go. I stared at it, confused for a moment, and then suddenly overcome with rage. Sorry, have to go? Was Jason serious? He couldn't have at least closed the door behind him and sent me a text? I snatched the paper off the ground. It was clearly torn off and written in a rush. Maybe he had an emergency and had no time to think things through. But then why was his car still here? Who knew? Who cared? I crumpled up the note and hurled it at the trash can across the room. Right at that moment, Barney went ballistic. Dog! I stormed out of the living room to see what he was up to now. He was barking at the closet. The coat closet. To the right of the fireplace. What the... I approached the dog, my sense of dread growing stronger by the second. I picked up the axe I'd set down earlier just in case. I reached for the door handle. Barney backed away, tail between his legs. I pulled the door open. Nothing. Totally normal closet. Some coats hanging up, a pair of muddy boots on the floor. The vibrating in my hands was getting worse though. But wait, back in the corner. What? The wall shouldn't extend that far. It just shouldn't. It would cut off the hallway on the other side. I stepped inside and was instantly hit with a wave of nausea so severe it brought me to my knees. When I bent down, I saw further back into the far corner, past the coats. Black. Deep, dark, soul black. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. A growl. I whipped around, fighting the urge to puke. Barney stood a few feet back from the door, poised to attack, snarling. Hackles all the way up from neck to tail. Whoa, I said, trying to sound calm. It's okay, buddy. He lunged, coming straight at me. Without thinking, I reached forward and slammed the door shut. Silence. More silence. Barney? I reached for the handle. It wasn't there. I felt around for it, but it was nowhere. The door frame was gone too. No. I felt around frantically, hoping I'd just step to the side a little without noticing. I felt all along the wall, but nothing. I let out a terrified sob. Then, then, on the back of my neck, a breath. I screamed and fell and just kept falling. I awoke in perfect darkness. The ground was cold and hard, the air perfectly still. I sat up, expecting pain, but I felt fine, except for those pins and needles. I looked around helplessly, eyes wide open but unseeing in the vast black. Then I felt something hard digging into my hip. My phone. I still had my phone. I yanked it out, and it was mercifully unbroken and still partially charged. But the image on the screen was messed up. It was like someone had shattered it and shoved the pieces haphazardly back together. I had never seen it do that before. I had never seen any phone do that before. I touched the screen, right in the center, and it started screaming. White noise, shrieking at me, like the phone was alive and in agony. On the screen, circles rippled frantically away from my thumb as though trying to escape. I dropped the phone and the noise stopped, and immediately I regretted it. Getting that phone to work might be my only way out, or maybe I'd find a way out and need to call for help. I knelt down and felt around the ground by my feet. After a minute, I started to panic that it had bounced away. But no, there it was. I tucked it back into my pocket. When I stood, my hand brushed something solid, and I jerked back, hitting a wall behind me. A wall. So this place wasn't endless. I reached out in front of me, took a few steps forward, and another wall. To my right, a wall. I reached out to my left, took a few steps. Nothing. That way was open. Maybe there was a way out of here. A few more steps and my toe bumped something solid, heavy. I bent down, felt around with my hand. The axe. It had come with me too. I gripped it tight and stood. I walked a bit further, shuffling because I was still blind. I would bump the left wall, then try to straighten out, then shuffle for a bit longer and bump the right wall. It was clear before long that this was a tunnel. I don't know how long I continued like that, in that dark. It felt endless, and it was getting colder, colder all the time. I was constantly terrified that I would suddenly drop off a cliff, or run into something dangerous, or find the end of this place and realize that I was truly trapped. And then, a light up ahead. More like a glow than a bright light, like the sun just starting to peek up over the horizon. I quickened my pace, bashing into the walls a couple of times. Colder and colder. As I got closer to the light, I realized it wasn't a single point. The light was coming from distinct points on either side of the tunnel. I was too far to say for sure, but I thought they looked like doorways. As I got closer, my suspicion was confirmed. Doorways, staggered along both sides of the tunnel, harsh, glowing lights, spilling from each of them. I approached the first one, shivering now. I looked through the doorway and felt the hope drain from me. It was static, like on a TV, white and glowy and fuzzy, a buzzing sound in the background. If I looked hard enough, I thought I could see movement behind it, but that could have just been my imagination, or my eyes playing tricks after so long in the dark. The vibrating in my hands was stronger here. I made my way to the next one, more of the same. Then my phone began to vibrate in my pocket. I yanked it out, praying that someone was calling, someone who could help, but no, it was just more ripples. Though this time it was happening without me touching the screen. The white noise was back, but quieter, matching the tone of the doorways. I put the phone back in my pocket. I took one tentative step toward the door, then another. I reached a hand out toward it, but as my fingers inched forward, an overwhelming sense of dread washed over me. I tried to push through it, But then the static did that rippling thing and it pushed back. It was like it was trying to repel me. Finally, when I couldn't take it anymore, I yanked my arm back. I dropped to the ground and started to cry, despair weighing me down. There was no way out. I sobbed and sobbed until I wore myself out, and then I just laid there staring up at nothing. The dread feeling slowly faded. I stood up and looked further down the tunnel. There were doors as far as I could see, alternating on either side. They all appeared to frame the same static as the first one. There was nothing else I could do. I kept walking. At first I looked closely at each doorway, trying to see if I could glean any meaning from them. But after a while I grew tired of it and gave up. I kept my gaze forward and trudged along for I don't know how long, until my legs started to ache with the effort. But then I noticed shapes in the static. At first I thought I was imagining it, that I'd spent too long in the dark and my mind was inventing things for me to see. But then the shapes were too defined to dismiss. I couldn't make out what they were doing, but there were definitely people moving around in there. I tried to call them, but they didn't seem to notice. I walked closer to one of them, hoping this time I might make it through, but the dread and the static pushed me back again. And then I could hear them. Almost imperceptible at first, but growing just a bit louder at each doorway. And then I could see scenes playing out. A man and a woman screaming at each other, their faces inches apart. I ducked away instinctively, as though any second they might turn on me. A creature, a dog lunging at the doorway. That one made me jump back in terror, fearing for a second that it might be able to pass through. It didn't though. It just disappeared and started over again a moment later. And the next one, a little girl sitting on the ground, hunched over herself, shaking. It took me a second to realize she was crying, sobbing. I felt strangely connected to her, like I could feel what she was feeling. I didn't have to get close this time. The dread slammed into me and I cried out. Hello? I said to the girl. Can you hear me? She just kept crying. She had no idea I was there. I collapsed, exhausted. How long had I been down here? Minutes? Hours? I couldn't keep going, but I couldn't sleep when I felt like this. I used the last of my remaining energy to crawl a little further, so I was in equal distance from the last door and the next. The dread wasn't gone here, but it was bearable. In any case, it weighed me to the spot. I couldn't have moved if I wanted to. I shut my eyes. I shot up to my feet in an instant, a scream reverberating through my head. I had slept no idea how long, but this wasn't a dream. It was real, and it wasn't muffled like the doorway sounds. It stopped. I had no idea which direction it had come from. I stopped and listened closely, but there was nothing now. My heart was pounding, fear and adrenaline pumping through me, and I knew I wasn't going back to sleep. I took up my journey again, faster now. The blurry scenes continued. The dread pressed in on me, forcing me to the middle of the tunnel, and as I walked and walked, glancing now and then at the doorways, I noticed something about the scenes. Maybe it was because they were becoming clearer, or because I'd been in here among them for so long, but they were familiar. I hadn't wanted to admit it at the time. I couldn't think clearly anyway, but that little girl, I knew her. I was her. And I remembered that moment. I'd just come home from school and my mom had sat me down, stony-faced, and told me that our cat had died. I had cried all night and the next day, and for days after she died. And the two people arguing, I couldn't see them clearly. I'm almost certain they were my parents. They'd had so many screaming matches just like that before we left. The neighbor's dog slipping his leash and attacking me. I still had that scar on my right arm, and there I was again, sitting alone at a lunch table, trying desperately not to cry, climbing a tree, then the ground rushing up at me. A group of girls surrounding me, laughing, pushing me down. I didn't know what this place was, or how it knew, or where it got my memories, but it was clear by now. It was playing back the worst moments of my life, and I was trapped in here with them. And I knew it was only going to get worse. If I wanted to ever get out of here, I had to keep going, though. I tried to keep my eyes down on the path in front of me, but it didn't help. I could still hear my cries, my screams, lost as I was in my despair. It took me longer than it should have to notice. Footsteps. Like the scream before, I knew they were real. They were not muffled like the doorways. They were clear and real and terrible, and they were coming from the direction I had just come from. I had to hurry. I didn't want to meet whatever lived down here. I started to jog. As I tried to put space between myself and the footsteps, the scenes grew clearer and more intense. My mom pulling me from my bed in the middle of the night and dragging me out to the car. No explanation, with nothing but the clothes we had on. I never saw my childhood home again. The footsteps are closer. I start to flat out run. Still, I could see the scenes playing out on either side of me. Another doorway, a hand lurching out for my neck. I screamed and tried not to look. And then, ahead, a light. Not like the doorways, not a white glare. It was warm and soft, and it was straight ahead. My muscles were screaming in pain at this point, but I sped up, listened to the footsteps get closer all the time. The static sound got louder and louder, occasional screams and cries piercing through it. I was almost there when I noticed a dark figure in the light, just standing there, staring. I stopped for a moment unsure, but the footsteps were still haunting me. I thought I could hear yelling from that way, not the muffled kind from the doorways. A real, live voice. There was no choice. I took off again, ready to meet my fate in the light. As I got closer, the figure began to take shape, a large man draped in shadow, the light behind him blinding me to his features. I locked eyes with him, or at least I imagined I did. He shouted something, and I raised the axe high and ran at him. I was almost there, steps away, when he lunged forward, hands outstretched. I screamed and swung the axe. It struck with a sickening thud, and the figure fell back into the light. He laid perfectly still, a dark pool forming around him. I stepped forward into the light and screamed. The axe clunked to the ground beside me. I knelt down to confirm the horrible act I already knew. Before me laid Jason, the life already gone from his eyes. His skin was ice white. His neck was half severed from his shoulders. He was dead. I had murdered someone. The thought raced around my mind, but I could not make it real. The footsteps, they were still coming, almost here. Suddenly, violently, I vomited, but I couldn't stop. I had to go. The footsteps were pounding now, the yelling louder, bouncing off the walls and whirring together with the static. Going against all my instincts, I looked over my shoulder for the source of the footsteps. I recoiled in horror at the sight. It was a human-shaped thing, made of static, with human features flashing through every few seconds. A hand, an eye, a length of hair, and running straight at me. Arms flailing, feet pounding, voice shrieking incoherently between patches of static, like a radio station going in and out of range. Everything in me was repelled by this absolute monstrosity. Sobbing, I stumbled over Jason's body, slipping and coating myself in his blood. With one last scream, I pulled myself out onto the porch. I turned over and looked back. The tunnel was gone, along with the body, the evidence of my crime. I crumpled to the ground and gasped with relief, the full horror of what I'd done yet to wash over me. The vibrating in my hands was painful now, like pins and needles after I'd been laying on my arms for hours. I shook and shook them, but it didn't help. And then a shadow to my left and a growl. I leapt up. Before me stood an angry beast, teeth bared and hackles up, inching towards me. "Barney?" I said, my voice trembling. "It's okay, buddy. It's me. You know me." He lunged, and I leaped over the porch railing, falling hard on my side. I groped around for the axe, but of course it was gone, lost to the tunnel. I stumbled to my feet and tried to run for my car. The key was somewhere, miraculously still in my pocket, but it wasn't there. I stood frozen for a second. But the dog was coming, so I sprinted for the trees as the raging dog leapt over the railing and chased after me. I entered the woods running as fast as I could, as branches and thorns tear at my clothes and skin. I could hear the dog's growls just feet behind me. I had no idea which direction I'm running in until I stumble onto the dirt road and nearly fall over. I took a moment to catch my breath, but the dog was at my heels. I bolted into the woods on the other side. My foot caught on a tree root, and I crashed into the ground, face first. I cried out in agony, scraping my tongue along the now cracked teeth in my mouth. I could hear the dog on the road now, coming straight for me. But then a flash of lights and the squeal of brakes. I considered crawling over, calling out, but then I remembered the blood on my clothes. What could I say? Then I heard a whistle, and another, and another. The dog stops growling, whimpers instead. I heard a car door open and slam shut again, and that's when I realized I ran onto the road just as the car was pulling away. My car. It rolls away into the dark. I followed the car, stopping just before I emerged from the trees. I can feel the night's wear on my muscles now that I've slowed. My limbs are so heavy. I'm so tired. I watched myself emerge from the car, and it's all I can do not to pass out. I lean against a tree and let myself sink to the dirt. There's a soft static sound echoing in my head now. My other self ushered the dog inside and closed the door. I sat there, gasping for air, lost in my own horror and confusion, for I don't know how long. I think I passed out. I came to myself eventually. The front door was shut, and I think Barney is gone from the car. The vibration has sped up my arms and into my shoulders, and I know what it is now. It's the static. It's in me now, in my head, ever since I touched the cube. I remembered the phone. I pulled it out, fumbling it at first because my hands won't stop vibrating. It was no longer spasming, but I still had no signal. At some point, though, I must have had one because I have 8 missed calls, all from Amy. She left a few voicemails of varying lengths, but they wouldn't load. One text got through. "Where are you? Please pick up." I had to get out of here. I had no idea where I'd go or what I'd do. No idea how I could live in a world where there are 2 of me. But I had to do something. I had to figure out how to get rid of this static, this infection somehow. I still had my car key in my back pocket. I watched the windows for a minute. No sign of other me. I creeped toward my car, key in hand, keeping low to the ground. As I got closer, I could hear Barney barking and grumbling inside. I unlocked the door and crawled inside, shut the door. Just in time. The cabin door swung open and other me walked out with the dog. I ducked down so they wouldn't see until they were gone again. And then I just sat there. I knew I needed to go. I wanted to go, but my stupid limbs wouldn't move. I couldn't stop thinking about the sickening thud the axe made when it connected with skin and bone. My hands shook. I wanted to throw up, but there was nothing in me to come out. I could see the static then, patches of it, forming on my hands and arms, undulating and slowly spreading. I realized that the other one, has disappeared from the window. I must have gone to brush my teeth. Maybe if I can get in there and stop myself from ever going into that closet, then Jason won't be dead. Screw it. I had to try. Slowly, quietly, I pushed the car door open and crawled toward the house. I winced as the front door creaks, but other me didn't notice. I stood and looked around. That's when I noticed my empty fast food bag resting on top of the trash. A white paper bag. It was me. Future me. The note. I snatch it out of there and stare at it helplessly. What was I trying to say? Sorry, I have to go? What? I snatched a pen off the counter and tore off a strip of paper and started scribbling, hoping I'd figure out the note as I go, but my hands and arms shook so bad, and I could hardly feel them. And then I got to the word go, and then I heard the bathroom door creak open. I dropped the note and backed into the living room. Barney had been fast asleep, but he opened his eyes. Slowly he raised his head, his eyes becoming angrier by the second, and his mouth curled up in a snarl, and he was barking. I bolted to the closet just in time, slipping behind the door just as other me emerges from the kitchen. I ducked behind the coats and felt around in the corner for the back hole, hoping I could block me from going down there, but it wasn't there. It was just closet. Other me enters and everything changes. The shrieking sound from the tunnels is back, but it's in my head and it paralyzes me as I feel the yawning gap open up beside me. Other me leans forward to inspect it, stares deep into it, and I can't help it. My breath brushes the back of her neck. She screams and falls and is gone. The gap is still open. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. I need to hurry if I'm ever going to stop her, and the static is in my gut now. My heart. It's going everywhere, but I need someone to know where I've gone and why. And maybe you can stop it. Don't come here. Just stop it. I've got to go now. Sorry. Have to go. That's it. The police said she was probably just writing a story since the events here can't possibly be true. They have no explanation for why the phone was on the floor in the closet, or why the note was still there in the trash, or where Steph had gone. What? She just wandered into the woods in the middle of the night, in a strange place, without the dog or any of her stuff? And where's Jason? They looked for traces of my brother's blood on and around the porch, but found nothing. It was raining by then, though, so who knows? The computers and the stuff on the roof is still there, but it doesn't seem to do anything. I touched the cube too, before I read Steph's message, and nothing turned on, but I think I felt a jolt in my fingers. I hope that was just nerves. The Wi-Fi was working fine. Steph's phone worked fine. The parts about her conversations with me are all true. I sent Steph's story to myself before I handed the phone back to the police. I brought Barney home with me. He's not hurt, but he's pretty shaken up. When we arrived, he ran straight to a corner of the living room and has been cowering there ever since. I keep bringing him food and water, but he barely touches it. He won't sleep, and I have to drag him outside for bathroom breaks. He also keeps staring at the door to my garage, alternately whining and growling. I've checked, and I hope I'm imagining it, but I don't think so. I think I see a shadow in the corner where there's never been one. I tried to approach, but I thought I could feel tingling in my fingertips. It feels like static, I got out of there, and I locked and barricaded the garage door. Please help. With my head throbbing and clutching my handbag tightly to my chest, I walked quickly through the indoor parking garage. A massive concrete structure. Every space was full. Cars of all makes and models squeezed between the lines. I was running late for my niece's 5th birthday. I find family occasions overwhelming. The innocent yet gut-wrenching questions like, when are you going to meet a nice young man and settle down? And the worst one, have you tried online dating? I just smile and give a rehearsed answer about my career. I continued to hurry through the parking garage. I stopped and scanned the area. I simply couldn't remember where I parked. My head was still throbbing, pounding to be exact. I never suffered from migraines, but that's the only way to describe it. That or a jackhammer to my temple. I reached into my handbag and took out a small bottle of pills. I swallowed a few pills. No water needed. A slight relief. I continued to look for my car. My car was a Mini, the opposite of all my friends' giant soccer mom SUVs. It suited me, small and understated. When I was young, my grandparents called me their little wallflower. However, unlike most kids, I never blossomed. Where did I park that thing? Although no one was nearby, I felt acute embarrassment. Let's be brutally honest. Everyone at some point has forgotten where they've parked, but they usually remember pretty quickly. Okay, let's regroup. My car must be here, otherwise how did I get here? Determined, I searched every row, car by car. I must have seen hundreds, maybe thousands of cars. The parking garage felt endless. The more I searched, the more my head began to pound and pound. It felt like my temples were going to burst. Again, I reached into my handbag and popped some pills. With hindsight, taking this sheer amount of medication should have raised alarm bells or rendered me unconscious. But at the time, I was so focused on getting to my niece's birthday party, it didn't even register. I would never forgive myself if I missed my niece's birthday. It hit me. Would anyone even know that I wasn't there? I wandered around the parking garage aimlessly. This is crazy. My car has to be somewhere. I spotted a tiny security booth by the entrance gates. Great. The surveillance cameras will show me exactly where I've parked. Soon this ridiculous ordeal will be behind me, and no one will ever know. I looked inside the security booth. There was an empty chair and a grainy old monitor. I waited for a while, but no attendant showed up. I tried to open the door, but it was locked. I strained to look at the monitor. The parking garage remained perfectly still. The time on the screen was 5:30. It suddenly dawned on me that since I entered the parking garage, no cars have arrived or left. I had no choice but to leave the parking garage. The security attendant never showed up. As I went outside, my headache roared back. It was relentless. I couldn't shake it. Swirling thoughts raced through my mind. Why did I not see anyone else in the parking garage? And did I actually park there? In the distance, I saw a large shopping mall. Maybe someone in there can help me find my car. After all, it must be where the shoppers park. I entered the bland 1990s shopping mall with 2 levels and a giant escalator in the center. The mall was packed with shoppers of all ages and ethnicities. I was forced to weave through several shoppers. I tried to catch a few of them in the eye, but they never looked back at me. It was like I was invisible. But I was used to that. I walked past several pointless stores where young store clerks mindlessly stacked shelves. One store that caught my attention was a clock store. It seemed misplaced. The store had every type of clock imaginable, from grandfather to cuckoo. I noticed that the time on each clock was 5:30. Surely that can't be right. That's the same time as the security monitor. I quickly checked my cell phone and the time was indeed 5:30. I continued on tentatively. I had this nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. I passed a small drugstore, and my attention was drawn to a young, disheveled homeless guy with a large rucksack slung over his shoulder. He clutched his back as he picked up a packet of bandages from a shelf. He turned and stared at me. We locked eyes for a little too long. It wasn't sexual. I just knew that I had seen him before, but I couldn't remember where or when. I broke eye contact and moved on. I didn't have time to hang around. I needed to find someone who could help locate my car. I needed to get to my niece's birthday party. I looked up to the second level and saw the Holy Grail, an information desk. I stepped onto the escalator, but they stopped working, so I was forced to walk up. My legs felt heavy and my head continued to pound. The escalator on the other side worked fine. Shoppers whizzed past me, looking straight ahead, their eyes glazed over. I finally reached the second level. As I stepped off, shoppers whizzed up behind me. I rolled my eyes. Did the escalator really just start working? I wasn't surprised based on the day I was having. Irritated, I marched over to the super large information desk, which would fit perfectly in a 90s sitcom. As I arrived, a young female attendant flicked over the "I'm on a break" sign and left. I shouted out, "Excuse me, excuse me," but she didn't hear me. I stood there in disbelief, my head pounding harder and harder. I instinctively popped some pills. My headache remained. The relief was becoming less every time. The guilt of missing my niece's birthday party preyed upon me. So I impulsively followed the attendant through a back staff door. What's the worst that can happen? I get thrown out by a mall cop and they escort me to my car. I entered a dark corridor with a faint light at the end. I slowly walked along the corridor. My inner monologue was telling me to turn back, but I couldn't stop. I was drawn toward the light, but it became dimmer with every step I took. I heard a sloshing sound. At the end of the corridor, a middle-aged janitor slowly mopped the floor back and forth with dirty water. He didn't look up, oblivious to me standing there. "Sir, do you know where the young lady went?" I meekly asked. He turned his back and kept mopping slowly, back and forth. Losing patience, I raised my voice. "I need help to find my car." He moved away and continued to mop, a little faster. I snapped. "I'm late for my niece's birthday party." He tilted his head and looked at me with black eyes. He spoke with a mouthless face. "You shouldn't be here." I ran for my life back along the corridor. As I reached the door, I heard the sloshing sound. I couldn't help but look back. The janitor slowly mopped the floor, back and forth. I raced down the escalator, which was no longer working again. My heart rate matched my pounding temples. A blur of shoppers on the other side of the escalator flashed before my eyes. I headed for the mall exit. I started to hyperventilate. I couldn't breathe, my lungs empty of oxygen. I swayed from side to side. The shoppers continued to browse the stores. No one stopped to help. I stumbled toward the automatic doors. I needed oxygen. My body was shutting down, but the automatic doors wouldn't open for me. I dropped to my knees, gasping for breath. Shoppers stepped past me, and the automatic doors opened. Unable to breathe, I reached out my hand. A hand grasped my hand and pulled me outside. I desperately sucked in oxygen. I gazed up and saw the young, homeless guy looking back at me. Little breaths, he tells me. His presence made me calmer and I breathed in and out. I know him, but how? I quickly rose to my feet and looked him straight in the eye. "Who are you?" I bluntly asked. I immediately regretted my tone, but I needed to know. The young homeless guy looked at me with his kind yet sad eyes. "I'm Thomas, but everyone calls me Beansy," he replied. "I prefer Thomas, but no one calls me Thomas." "Why did you help me?" I bluntly asked. I regretted my tone once again. "'Cause you're the first person who's looked at me today," he replied. "We've got that in common," I replied. "What's your name?" he asked. "Penelope, though my parents only called me that when I was naughty," I answered. "I was rarely naughty, so everyone called me Penny. I prefer Penelope." Thomas smiled. "Penelope, we've got that in common as well." We shook hands. "What brings you here?" Thomas asked. It seemed like an innocuous question, but I felt there was more behind it. Does he know why I'm here? But how can he know when I don't even know? Of course, deep down I knew why I was here, but if I couldn't admit it to myself, how could I admit it to a stranger? I hesitated. "I'm here to pick up a few things for my niece's birthday party." He studied me for a minute. I quickly changed the subject. "I forgot where I parked," I told him. Thomas chuckled and I tapped him on the side. "That's not funny." He winced and clutched his lower back. "Sorry," I said. "I'm fine," he sharply replied. He glanced at his watch. I noticed that the time on his watch was 5:30. Before I can say anything, he told me, "My train's about to leave soon." "Thank you, Thomas," I said. "Will you be okay?" he asked. "I'm just going to get an Uber. I'll figure out the car situation another time," I replied. Thomas smiled and walked away. I noticed that every few seconds he clutched his lower back. I watched him till he was out of sight. Will I see him again? Something told me inside he knew the reason why I couldn't remember where I'd parked. Okay, so I need to refocus. I've been here way too long and my niece's birthday party will be over soon. It hit me again. Would anyone even notice that I wasn't there? I took my cell phone from my handbag and tried to book an Uber. There were no drivers available in the area. That's strange. I know it's not New York, but it's still a town. Undeterred, I googled for cab agencies, and there was only one agency. I went straight through to a male operator. I could hear sirens in the background. The operator asked, "Where is your location?" My head started to pound again as I realized I didn't actually know where I was. I quickly tried to search Google Maps, but I couldn't focus on the screen. It was all a blur. The monotone operator repeated, "Where is your location?" I tried to ask a passerby, but they ignored me and entered the mall. In desperation, I grabbed an elderly lady's arm and asked her, "Where am I?" She turned, and her dark eyes pierced through me. I quickly released her arm, and she carried on into the mall. The operator repeated the same question. "Where is your location?" I tried to describe the town. "There's this mall." The operator repeated, "Where is your location?" My head felt like it was going to explode. I shouted at the operator, "I can't find my car." The operator gave me the same cold response. "Where is your location?" I couldn't answer and I was forced to end the call. I looked around the town. I was lost. I popped some pills and walked quickly through the gray concrete town. I arrived at a small, old railway station with 2 empty tracks. I had no idea which direction I needed to go, but it didn't matter. I just needed to leave this place. Something was terribly wrong. On the platform, Thomas sat on a bench with his headphones on. He was singing a country song. I couldn't make out the song, but I remembered thinking he had a pleasant voice. I must admit I was relieved to see him, but also concerned he was still waiting. I tentatively sat beside him, leaving plenty of space. Thomas removed his headphones and looked at me with his kind, sad eyes. I noticed there was no song playing on his cell phone. "So, what happened to your Uber?" he asked. "No drivers in my area," I replied. I was too embarrassed to mention the cab incident. It's too bad he knows that I couldn't remember where I'd parked. As he was about to put his headphones back in, I asked him, "When's the train supposed to leave?" 5:30, he replied. He checked his watch and it was still 5:30. "It must be broken," he added. I checked my cell phone and the time was 5:30. I stared at him. "It's not just your watch that is broken." We both waited in silence. No trains arrived or left the platform. I couldn't tell you how long we waited. It could have been minutes or hours. It's difficult to judge when time appears to stop. Eventually, Thomas broke the silence. "Where are you going?" "My niece's birthday party," I replied. "How old is she?" he asked. With a glint in my eye, I answered, 5, and I'm her favorite aunt." He quickly followed up with another question. "Why are you late for the party?" I glared back at him. It's like he already knew but wanted me to clarify. But how does he know? And how does he fit into all this? Of course, I knew the answer, but it was still too painful to admit. I quickly changed the subject. "Where are you going with such a large rucksack?" I must admit, it did cross my mind that instead of going, he could be escaping. "Going home," he replied. "It's been too long." I smiled. "I'm sure your family will be pleased." He then proceeded to tell me his life story about being the black sheep of the family. I could see the pain and rejection in his eyes. It was on the tip of my tongue to ask him why his parents kicked him out, but everyone deserves a second chance. I hoped that my family would forgive me for missing my niece's birthday party. By now I realized I wasn't going to make it. My only focus now was to leave this town. Thomas looked me in the eye and told me the real reason he was going back. "I need a good bath." He jokingly smelt under his armpits. We both chuckled and went back to staring at the empty track. I popped some pills and Thomas looked at me. "What?" I said defensively. He replied, "You've been taking pills non-stop since I met you." It was now dusk and clearly no trains were ever coming. Together, we headed back into the town. In the background, the unnerving sound of sirens. Thomas winced and clutched his back. Blood seeped through his jacket. "You're bleeding," I remarked. He quickly replied, "Just a scratch." I wasn't convinced. Thomas dropped back, struggling to lift his large rucksack. "Would you like some help?" I asked. He didn't answer and picked up the pace. We arrived at the shopping mall and Thomas stepped towards the automatic doors. I stopped, afraid to go inside. I had a strange feeling that once inside, I might never be allowed to leave. I came over all woozy. Thomas caught me as I fell. "When was the last time you ate something?" he asked. Inside the mall, nothing had changed. Shoppers continued to mindlessly browse the stores. We entered a 60s retro diner where customers sat in silence across from each other in booths. It was like they had nothing left to say. We queued at the counter and gave our order to a cashier, who barely acknowledged us. I kept the order simple: coffee and cake, one of life's simple pleasures. Thomas just ordered a coffee. I guess he lost his appetite. He was starting to look weaker. The cashier rang up the bill. Thomas looked down. I didn't mind paying. So I reached into my handbag, and to my surprise, I lifted out a wad of cash. Why the heck do I have cash? Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Thomas staring at the cash. We sat opposite each other in a booth. Do you get the feeling these people don't know we're here? I asked. Thomas gave a response I wasn't expecting. Can you remember the faces of everyone you meet? I felt guilty. He's right. We never stop to take the time to get to know one another. Even our close friends and family don't truly know who we are. My head started to pound, and I instinctively popped some pills. We waited for what could have been seconds, minutes, or hours. The diner owner, a large, jovial man in his 60s wearing an apron, walked over and put down our order. He spoke with a gentle southern drawl, but like everyone else here, he couldn't look us in the eye. Ma'am, latte with a slice of cake, he said. And sir, one Americano. I stared down at the slice of pink birthday cake. The diner owner casually left. Starving, I started to devour the pink birthday cake, but it was chalky and tasteless. Thomas sipped his black coffee, which became slick like oil. He recoiled in disgust. At that moment, every customer stood up and left. The diner owner returned to our booth. Mall's closing, he told us. I need to speak to someone about my car, I remarked. Better eat and drink up, he added. It was like he was on autopilot. He then told us something chilling in his gentle southern drawl. You don't want to be here when it's dark. It's different when it's dark. The diner owner casually left. Thomas and I exchanged a look of deep concern. We exited the mall diner, still hungry and thirsty. The shoppers were leaving the mall in droves. I heard the familiar, disturbing sloshing sound. Dozens of janitors were mopping the floor back and forth. They looked up with their black eyes and circled toward us, mopping faster and faster. We ran through the mall toward the exit. You shouldn't be here, they chanted with their mouthless faces. It dawned on me. They weren't chasing us. They were warning us. We sprinted to the automatic doors which were closing. I knew they wouldn't reopen, and we would be trapped inside forever. As the mall lights went off, we scraped through the automatic doors. Outside was now pitch black. Sirens roared in the background. Maniacal laughter echoed through the streets. I turned to Thomas. We're getting out of here. My car has to be in the parking garage. With only the moonlight to guide us, we headed toward the parking garage. Clutching his lower back, Thomas could barely lift up his rucksack, but still wouldn't allow me to help. A fleeting thought crossed my mind. Is there something in the bag he doesn't want me to see? The maniacal laughter grew louder and louder. I glanced behind to see if we were being followed, and to my horror, the moonlight shapes shifted into demon silhouettes. This must be a hallucination. It can't be real. I looked behind again, and the demon silhouettes grew larger and more defined. We arrived at the parking garage. Once inside the parking garage, the roaring sirens and the maniacal laughter stopped. The demon silhouettes didn't follow us in. Are they not allowed in here? Are there rules? The parking garage was still packed full of cars. What car do you drive? Thomas asked. I struggled to answer him. I couldn't remember. My headache had been getting progressively worse. It was as if someone stabbed a screwdriver through my temples. I popped some pills and closed my eyes. I flashed back to earlier when I drove my Mini into the parking garage. Back to reality, I shouted out, Mini. We scanned the parking garage, and every single car was now a Mini. I stared at the rows upon rows of Minis in sheer disbelief. Use your fob, Thomas told me. I fumbled to find my key fob in my handbag and noticed the wad of cash. Why do I have that amount of money? I pressed my fob and every single car flashed open. Suddenly a wave of shoppers and staff from the mall entered the parking garage. They simultaneously got into their minis and drove off. One of the minis drove straight at us, and I yanked Thomas and myself behind a concrete pillar. I heard slow, loud footsteps. I peered from behind the pillar and saw the diner owner walking towards the last remaining mini. I jumped out from behind the pillar. "That's my car." He spoke in his gentle southern drawl. "You don't want to be here when it's dark. It's different when it's dark." He gets into the car and closes the door. "Please take us with you," I cried out. "We need to leave this place." The diner owner casually reversed out of the space. I desperately pounded on the windshield. "Help us! Help us!" The diner owner drove off, and I was forced to step away. My head was on the verge of exploding. I chugged back the bottle of pills. The parking garage spun around me. I snapped out of my trance and looked over at Thomas, who was lying in a pool of his own blood. I removed his blood-soaked bandage, and to my shock saw a large, gaping hole from his back to his stomach. "You've been shot," I exclaimed. His eyes glazed over. He whispered, "I know." I wrapped my t-shirt tightly around his wound and called for an ambulance. "My friend's been shot," I cried out. The monotone operator asked, "Where is your location?" I was forced to end the call. I realized no one would be coming to save us. I turned to Thomas, who struggled to keep his eyes open. "We're leaving this godforsaken town." With my arm around his waist, we exited the parking garage. Thomas limply dragged his rucksack along the ground. He refused to leave it behind. Outside, I nervously scanned right and left. There was no sign of the demon silhouettes. Maybe it was just a hallucination from my headaches. I decided to turn left. It didn't matter as long as we could escape to another town and get help. I struggled to pull Thomas along, who was getting progressively weaker. He still clasped onto his rucksack like his life depended on it. Blood dripped from his bullet wound, creating a trail. Sirens raged in the background. The demon silhouette's shape shifted from the moonlight and laughing maniacally followed us. I tried to move faster, but the demon silhouettes got closer. "Let me go," Thomas gasped. "We're in this together," I told him. "We're going to leave together." We were forced to hide in an alleyway. At the end of the alleyway, I saw a bright, shining light. I had a sudden awakening. We needed to pass through the light. It's our only chance to leave this town. A jarring pain seared through my head. I collapsed Thomas and myself hard to the ground. We both lay there, incapacitated. The demon silhouettes towered above us like skyscrapers. I desperately reached into my handbag for my bottle of pills, but it was empty. Thomas strained and reached into his rucksack. He took out another bottle of pills and passed them to me. I instinctively paid him with the wad of cash. We locked eyes, and at that precise moment, I knew who he was, and he knew who I was. I flashed back to earlier when I walked quickly through the streets. I clutched my handbag tightly to my chest as I passed a large, hooded gang who laughed at me. I spotted a young homeless guy in a side alleyway. I nervously approached Thomas and asked him if he had any drugs. It wasn't the first time I'd searched the street for drugs. I was ashamed, but the humiliation of attending my niece's birthday party single was too much to handle. I just had to take the edge off. I had no choice but to get high. Thomas seemed unsure, but reached into his rucksack and handed me a bottle of pills. I took out the wad of cash from my handbag. Back in the strange town, the demon silhouettes engulfed me and pulled me away. I tried to fight back, but I stood no chance. They were too powerful. With his final surge of energy, Thomas lunged off the ground and pulled me back. I flashed back to the hooded gang robbing me of my cash. They grabbed my neck from behind and were choking me. I desperately tried to fight them off, punching, kicking, and clawing, but they were too strong. Thomas lunged at them and pulled me away. Thud. A hooded gang member shot Thomas in the back, who collapsed to the ground. I saw his eyes roll back. With sirens in the background, the hooded gang threw me to the ground and ran away. Crack. My head hit the concrete. Everything went dark. Back in the strange town, the demon silhouettes now had us both. They pulled us further away from the light into darkness. Thomas was too weak to fight back. His eyes glazed over, but I refused to give up and pulled us back toward the light. I screamed out, "We need to leave this town." I woke up being rushed on a gurney by EMTs into the ICU. I passed a janitor with his eyes down, mopping the floor back and forth. I dipped in and out of consciousness. The doctors checked under my eyes with a light and called out my name, Penelope. I caught a glimpse into the neighboring room of doctors performing emergency CPR on Thomas. Everything went dark again. Back in the strange town, the bright light exploded toward me like a supernova. I reached out my hand, which was absorbed by the light. I was ready to pass through. I looked behind at the demon silhouettes dragging Thomas out of the alleyway. What would be his fate? Would he be destined to live for eternity like the other soulless entities here? The light had now absorbed half my body, but I couldn't leave him. I must save my friend. So I pulled away from the light and entered the darkness. With my head about to erupt and blood pouring out of my ears, I chased after the demon silhouettes who scraped Thomas along the ground back toward the mall. Thomas' eyes turned from white to black, but I refused for him to become another mindless drone and grabbed his rucksack that he still clung on to, a symbol of him going home to his family. I pulled with all my might, but the demon silhouettes wouldn't release him. The light from the alleyway became faint. I gritted my teeth and channeled every negative emotion from feeling unloved, unworthy, and embarrassed of who I am. I screamed at the top of my lungs. This little wallflower deserves happiness. And with one final burst of energy, I ripped us away from the demon silhouettes into the light. My eyes opened wildly and I found myself lying in a hospital bed. I spoke to a kind nurse. "What happened?" I asked. "You were found unconscious in an alleyway." She replied. "What about the young guy with the rucksack?" I asked. She hesitated to answer. I presumed it had something to do with patient confidentiality. I looked at her with desperate eyes. "Please, I need to know if Thomas is alive." The nurse was taken aback that I knew his name. She leaned in close and told me, "He's alive, but it was touch and go. At one point he was pronounced clinically dead." I took a long, deep breath. While recovering from my head trauma, I regularly took trips to see Thomas. He was always asleep and hooked up to machines. A few weeks later, I was declared fit to leave. But I didn't want to. I needed to speak to Thomas. I needed to find out whether the strange town was real or a dark part of my subconscious. If we were there, and the events actually happened, there would be proof of an alternate reality. Some would call it purgatory. I wasn't sure which answer I was looking for. Both terrified me. Only Thomas could provide the answer. So every day for over a year I waited on a bench outside the hospital for him to leave. I was banned from going inside, so I had no choice. One nondescript day, Thomas walked out of the hospital with his rucksack slung over his shoulder. He was slimmer than I remembered, but looked fresh and healthy. Although I had longed for this moment, I decided to let him pass by. The strange town was my burden to carry, and I wanted Thomas to be free to move on with his life. Thomas continued to walk away. He stopped and turned to look at me. We locked eyes, and I knew at that moment what happened to us was real. There was an unbreakable bond. We had both experienced the strange town. Together we left the hospital and walked along a busy street. We passed people grinding through their everyday lives, oblivious to the truth. Thomas and I don't say anything to each other. We don't need to. We know what happened. Up ahead was a street diner. Thomas turned to me. "Shall we get a coffee?" "It can't be worse than last time," I quipped. Inside the diner, we sat across from each other in a booth. The diner owner, a middle-aged, slim Italian-American woman, put down her coffee and cheesecake. She spoke with a thick Brooklyn accent. "Better eat and drink up." Thomas and I looked at each other. "You don't want to be here when it's dark. It's different when it's dark." The ping from the computer in the corner tells me that a new order just came in, which means he will be back soon to cut me open. I can still feel the knife on my skin from the last time. The wounds are long gone, of course, but the memory never seems to fade. You'd think with all the money he has made off of me, he could afford to sedate me properly. He always said there was no reason to bother because he had invested in soundproofing the room. Instead, at least he gave me this phone, mostly so I could play offline mobile games because he obviously couldn't let me have internet access. Which is why, when I finish writing this, I'm going to send it, even if it can't go to anyone yet. That way, if this phone is ever connected to the internet, even by accident, hopefully it will go through, no matter where I am by then. Either way, I should hurry. I don't have long to tell my story. So how did I end up here? Well, I'm sure everyone says this, but the whole thing started innocently enough, with a car crash. I was 17 at the time, and we were all on our way back from a party. It turned out that the designated driver hadn't been taking their job as seriously as we had expected. I don't remember the accident. Either I had fallen asleep in the car, or my mind just blocked the memory out. I'll never know. But I do remember waking up in the river. The car was upside down and water was seeping in, slowly filling the space around us. It might sound strange, but I remember my first thought so clearly, even all these years later. It was, "Please don't let me die in my crappy hometown." I won't say where I lived exactly. It isn't really important. If you have been to any small town, you know what it was like. It wasn't just that it was boring there, with nothing to do in the evenings but drive out to a field and get drunk with whichever classmates could manage to sneak out that night. It wasn't just that I was a teenager yearning for bigger and better things. After all, I haven't been a teenager for a long time and I still hate it there. No, it was the people. I am sure they weren't any worse than people anywhere else, but with so few of them present, relatively speaking, it could be inordinately difficult to find anyone you really meshed with. Sometimes you just had to spend time with anyone you could tolerate, and who returned the favor. After the accident, there weren't many of those left for me. I was the only one that survived that night. The paramedics were astounded that I was still alive after so long underwater. They theorized that I must have ended up in some sort of air pocket that kept me breathing until they arrived and pulled the car out. I tried to tell them what had really happened, that I had, in fact, been breathing in river water for over an hour, feeling myself drowning and dying over and over, but without the blissful darkness to release me. Instead, I would reset back to perfect health, then repeat the process again, just a functional eternity of agony until rescue came. No one believed me. They chalked it up to a near-death hallucination, and eventually I convinced myself of that too. After all, the alternative was impossible. It took me a long time to come to terms with the fact that I survived when no one else did, but that's not something I want to dwell on here. I've dwelled on it enough in therapy. Regardless, I put the strangeness of that out of my mind until the next time I died. I was home from university visiting my family over the winter break. I figured that the only stress would be from trying to hide my new tattoo from my mother. The house fire disrupted that a bit. When the firefighters pulled me out of the basement, where I had been trapped by the flames, they told me it was a miracle I had survived. This time I knew for certain that I hadn't. I felt my death, but it couldn't claim me for some reason, and I needed to figure out why. That wasn't a quick process, so I will spare you the details and just summarize what I have learned over the years. The first and most important thing I found out is that everyone gets one, and only one, request of the universe. The trick is you don't get to decide which of the many requests you will probably make over the course of your lifetime gets granted. It seems to be mostly random. That is why most people don't even notice that this happens, because what they are granted is so small or random, and there is no way to tell anything unusual even happened. How many times have you silently wished for a traffic light to turn green before you get there? Or for a table to open up at your favorite restaurant? Or for the zipper to come unstuck on your jacket? We make so many tiny, inconsequential wishes or requests of the universe that most people's boons end up being nothing special. Mine was a little different. Basically, I can't die, but only if I am in my hometown. Yes, I have tested that. It turns out it was sort of a monkey's paw type deal. I got what I wanted, but only that. I won't die in my crappy hometown, but the second I leave, all bets are off. I would recommend that people be careful with their wording, but it wasn't like I was even intentionally making a wish. Was I? How could I have known? How could anyone? So the whole thing was a bit of a mixed blessing. Immortality might seem like a nice thing to have, but it also meant I was stuck there, in the place I hated since I was a child. I could still have left, of course. Realistically, I would only have been taking the same risk that anyone does when living their life. But how many of you could really walk away from that kind of safety? Whatever you think, you'll never really know until you face with the same decision. I used to leave time to time, but whenever anything went wrong, all I could think was, what if I die here, like this? So I left town less and less, drawing in on myself. Perhaps the irony was intentional. The wish I made because I wanted nothing more than to leave was what kept me there, of my own free will. So I stayed, but since I knew I couldn't die, I began taking greater and greater risks. Perhaps it was to make up for my own cowardice, or perhaps it was simply because I was miserable. I bought a motorcycle that I drove much too fast. I took up base jumping, splunking, bungee jumping, rock climbing, though the cliffs in town were nothing to write home about, and that was how I met Reese. Reese was part of the admittedly small, thrill-seeking community in town. Honestly, he was kind of mean, but like I said, in small towns you have to make do with what you've got. At least he was exciting. People said that he took things too far, that he was reckless, even cruel. But that was what I liked about him. He was interesting. And really, what was he going to do? Kill me? We dated for a while, mostly just casual, but I had fun with him. Maybe a bit too much, because one day I blurted out something I shouldn't have. I told him I couldn't die. He didn't believe me, of course. Who would? He just thought I was drunk, which in fairness, I was, or I wouldn't have said anything in the first place. In the sober light of day, I was glad he hadn't believed it, and hoped he would just forget the whole thing. Maybe he would have, if it hadn't been for the climbing incident. It was just the two of us up there that day. We were free soloing up a somewhat challenging route that I hadn't tried before, and no one else was crazy enough to join us. Maybe I was trying to impress Reese a bit. I'm not really sure. Whatever the reason, I jumped for a handhold that I couldn't quite reach and I didn't make it. I fell a long way and landed badly. And I don't mean a broken leg or a sprained shoulder. Badly. I felt my neck hit rock, felt it snap. I knew I had died there. I could always tell when I died, and it just didn't take. This was definitely one of those times. On the upside, it did resolve the cold I had been struggling with for a few days, so silver linings. You see, a few moments after I die, my body simply resets to a state of perfect health. Slate wiped clean. If it didn't hurt in a way that I can't really even describe, I would probably have used it to cure all my ailments, but I digress. By the time Reese climbed down to me, I was already brushing myself off and preparing a story about how I had managed to catch myself a couple of times on the way down, so I really didn't fall that far. I'd hoped his view of my tumble hadn't been very good, but I could tell by the look in his eyes that I hadn't been that lucky. He'd seen everything, and he knew I was lying. Reese didn't call me out on it though. He acted like everything was normal, and we even continued to see each other. I convinced myself that I had gotten away with it and resolved to be more careful in the future. Then the accident started. The first time it happened, I was just walking up to his apartment when the air conditioner dislodged itself from the window and came hurtling down, landing only inches from me. Reese apologized profusely, saying he was trying to do some repairs and it slipped, but it kept happening. My brakes failed. I got brutal food poisoning whenever he cooked for me. I stepped into the shower to find that the tub had been greased. I probably let it go on longer than I should have, but I assumed it was just bad luck. At first. After all, he would have to be crazy, right? But eventually, it was too much. Even for me. And I confronted Reese about all the strange accidents that had befallen me recently. At first he tried to deny it, but eventually he admitted that he now believed that I couldn't die, and he just wanted to see how it worked. What was the harm if he wasn't hurting me? I corrected that misconception pretty quickly. It did hurt to die. It was, in fact, excruciating, even the ways people usually considered painless, because if you lived, you still had to feel everything reset itself, and that wasn't pleasant. He apologized, saying that he misunderstood, and asking for another chance. I agreed, in part because I didn't want him to go blabbing to everyone in town. In reality, that should have been the least of my concerns. There are worse things than gossip, even worse things than death, it turns out. I woke up the morning after we reconciled to find that I was chained to an operating table. It didn't take long for me to learn why. See, Reese has always been the type of guy who is skilled at using people. It turned out that all that testing and observation was just Reese determining the best way to use me. Once he learned that I retained no lasting damage from any of my fatal injuries, he realized that he could basically use me to print money. After all, I have O-negative blood and a functionally infinite supply of almost any organ you could possibly want. He started a black market online auction site where he sells off healthy organs to the highest bidder. Never too many at once. He didn't want to flood the market. Just enough to finance his lifestyle. I am not sure how long I was down in that dingy basement. Months at least. Maybe a year. Dozens of operations. Months of feeling exquisite agony of a scalpel slicing through my skin and muscle. Dozens of deaths. And the unfathomable pain that came with them. More than the human mind should have to bear. Physically, I am in perfect health. As fit as the day I woke up in chains. Mentally, well, that is a bit different. It never fades, you see, the feeling of dying. I have wished for real death 1,000 times since that first morning, But you only get one wish, which means that there was only one avenue left open to me, the one I should have taken years ago. Before I even ended up in this situation, I needed to leave my hometown. The idea took way too long to occur to me. In my defense, I haven't been in a great state of mind lately, but eventually it occurred to me that while I had told him I couldn't die, I never mentioned the one string that came attached. So if I could just convince Reese to move on, even just a few kilometers outside of town, then this would finally all be over. It took time. I needed to be careful. If I pushed too hard, tipped my hand, I might never get another opportunity. So I was patient. He had gained a fair amount of wealth by then, so I began by wondering aloud how he would keep justifying his repeated visits to this town, despite the fact that he had otherwise relocated to a mansion on the opposite coast. All those trips were bound to look suspicious, wouldn't they? Couple that with his mysterious wealth, absent any legitimate source of income, and some small-town cop was liable to start asking questions, maybe even get a few search warrants. The cops in that town were, for the most part, very bored. They wouldn't be expecting this, of course, but while they were searching for his meth lab or grow op, they might inadvertently stumble upon something he didn't want them to find. I didn't suggest that he move me. Instead, I suggested he release me before he got caught. He had plenty of money now, didn't he? And it wasn't like I could ever tell anyone what he had done. Who would believe it? I didn't truly think he'd agree, but it couldn't hurt to try. He ignored me at first, but over time, I could see that it preyed on his mind. He increased security, started coming less and less often, and when he was there, he was constantly looking over his shoulder. After about a month, he finally made the obvious choice. He had decided to move me to a reinforced bunker he had constructed under his new estate. It would really be for the best, he gloated. No chance the cops would notice if he didn't even have to leave home to go to the bank, as he called it. I had to struggle to hide my smile. And that brings us pretty much up to the present. I arrived at my new accommodations this morning, smuggled over on his private jet. If only I could have at least looked out the window. But of course they kept a bag over my head the whole time. I wish I had gone out and seen the world. Well, I still had the chance, despite the risks. But hindsight is 20/20, isn't it? I can at least take a little bit of pleasure in the thought that Reese will never understand why it didn't work this time. He deserves worse, of course, but this will have to be enough for me. He'll be down here soon to harvest my lungs or heart or kidneys, and then I won't have to care about him at all anymore. I am looking forward to it. I hope somebody sees this account someday. I'd like to think that someone will eventually know the truth. But even if they don't, that's okay. I got what I really needed in the end. I got out of my hometown.